Hi everyone, I'm back and I'm going to go over some of the basic theories that you see in human development. And so some of the major theoretical perspectives are behavioral or behaviorism, where we really look at how the environment influences behavior and emotions. So the environment can influence you in terms of classical conditioning, operant conditioning, or social learning theory. In other words, you can pair stimulus and response associations from your environmental experiences. You can experience consequences in your environment, such as reinforcements or punishments that might influence your behavior, emotions. And then you can also have someone that is modeling a particular behavior, emotion, or attitude to you. All three of those things combined can be very powerful influences in shaping your perspectives, attitudes, and behavior. The cognitive view really takes behaviorism or addresses another element of behaviorism. One of the criticisms of behaviorism is that it's just kind of stimulus response, and it really doesn't give way for any allowance of individual value. For instance, not everybody responds to the same stimulus the same way. The cognitive perspective does allow for that, in that it looks at how important your individual perspectives and mental processing might shape your behavioral or emotional reactions to any given situation. So your attitudes, interpretation, and perspective as an individual is a major driving force in shaping your development. The humanistic view in general is really looking at the individual potential toward growth and improvement. And to coin Maslow, we are striving towards self-actualization. In other words, we're trying to become better and become all that we're capable of being, achieving our full potential, which is the embodiment of self-actualization. And the humanists believe that there's like this inner goodness and inner drive, and individuals are really in control of their destiny, and the human spirit in general is striving for growth and positive actualization over our lifetime. The psychoanalytic perspective really is rooted in Freudian theory. This is in fact his theory, and he really is talking about the importance of the unconscious, and that's outside of our direct awareness being a significant factor in shaping our behavior, attitudes, and emotions. And then the final perspective on this slide is the psychobiological perspective, which looks at the underlying biological processes that work together with psychology that shape our particular behavior. And you may have heard of, we have a chemical imbalance. There are underlying neurotransmitters that are directly related to various disorders. And so that really holds to the psychobiological perspective, in that we're understanding the biological basis of any given behavior or condition. So let's go back and look at Freud's psychosexual theory of development. So Freud actually has three different theories that he has formulated that have contributed to the field of psychology. The psychoanalytic perspective really is more of his therapeutic perspective, where he looks at the unconscious as a driving force of who we are and our pathologies that might emerge. And so really based upon that view, therapists who subscribe to a psychoanalytic perspective are really trying to get into what is in your unconscious. So they might engage in dream analysis or free association, projective tests like the Rorschach test, but they're really trying to discover what's in your hidden unconscious, and their whole role is to bring that out into the forefront. And the thought is, through that conscious awareness, that you have this cathartic effect. And catharsis is like, it's now that you're aware of it, it's kind of released and you're free. So as long as it's trapped in your unconscious, it might have some power or control over you, and the whole objective is to kind of set that free. Another perspective that he has is his personality theory, and that really speaks to the notion of the unconscious because it talks about us having 3 different levels of consciousness: the pre-conscious, which is kind of just under the surface, our conscious, which we're directly aware of and we are in control of, and then the pre-conscious just under the surface with just a little bit of coaching or prompting, you can say, oh, that's what's causing me to behave that way. And then the unconscious, which is kind of deep within the ocean's abyss, and that we need help through the support of a psychoanalytic therapist. And then his last theory is a developmental theory, and it's his psychosexual theory of development. And he really is focusing on the importance of childhood, specifically those first 6 years of our life are critical because we're building different elements of our personality, including our id, our ego, and our superego. And those first 3 years, ideally, if you have really good parenting, particularly in Freud's day and age, the focus was on the mother, then she's going to help really build a good sense of right or wrong, and that's governed by our superego. So our personality is made up of these 3 different components. The id, which is really kind of our primitive element, it's based on immediate gratification and urges, and that's driven by the pleasure principle. So I want to kind of meet that immediate need for pleasure now. Our ego, which is more of the kind of, well, let me go from id to superego. Superego is, so I look at the id as this little red devil that says, I want it now. And I look at the superego as more of that little white angel that is all about being moral. And it's more than morality, it's more like purity, it's more like perfection. So they're really encouraging you, that little white angel is encouraging you to really kind of be pure and wholesome and do all the right things. This is more kind of primitive, my own internal desires and urges. This is more kind of society dictating what's right or wrong. And then the ego is more of that balancing between the two, and that's your reality principle that says, okay, that guy is hot. Oh, but you're in a relationship. You shouldn't think those things. And the reality principle might help you meet in the middle and say, well, it's okay to look and admire as long as I'm not taking action. Or, I'm going to eat that whole cake. Well, cake's not healthy for you and you should be eating healthy. The reality principle might say, well, everything in moderation, so maybe a slice is acceptable. But it's kind of balancing the two. And that psychosexual theory of development is saying in those first 6 years of life, this is natural, we're born with it. This is something that, good parenting is going to help to instill upon us. And then that's going to empower our ego to have that healthy balance and realistic choices. And then he really goes through what he calls the psychosexual stages of development. And they're all focused on kind of a central focal point for sensation or desire. And, this is kind of the center of our sexual, and that's where the psychosexual development comes in. This is the center of kind of our sexual pleasure at each stage of life. Keep in mind for his concept of sexual, it was really any kind of physical pleasure. It didn't necessarily have to be sexual in the way that we've kind of coined the term for modern times. And if you do not have the right balance for any of these stages, then you might become what he called fixated or stuck. Your development doesn't progress in a healthy manner beyond that stage. So you might have behaviors and emotional challenges well into adulthood that reflect your lack of appropriate gratification, balanced gratification during these stages. So in infancy, he suggested that We go through the oral stage of development, and if you think about an infant, everything goes right into the mouth. And that sensory experience is very pleasurable for them, and that's kind of how they learn and understand, and that's where their urges and needs are all centered around their oral sensations. So a lot of sucking and chewing and biting. And if someone is not properly gratified, maybe their mom doesn't breastfeed them often enough, or maybe she takes them off the breast or the bottle too soon, they might become what he called orally fixated, which might be manifested in eating challenges or smoking behaviors or something else that involves, you needing to kind of fulfill that oral gratification that wasn't met in your childhood. In toddlerhood, you advance into the anal stage of development. The really central area or achievement in toddlerhood is potty training. So learning to control your anus and your bowel movements is really important. And it's very pleasurable to, or relieving, to be able to control and manage your own bowel movements. And so in that sense, you see that if you might have a parent that is really strict and rigid and forcing you to be potty trained, maybe even earlier than you're really physically capable of. And they might be very critical and harsh with you and very rigid and structured, and they didn't give you a healthy balance. In that case, you might become anally fixated. And that, if you've ever heard of a person being anal, they're very rigid, very controlling. They like things orderly. They like to, do things a certain way. Or they could be anally expulsive, like the nutty professor who just has this kind of mad science approach in this cluttered, chaotic office area and workspace. And that might be somebody who was raised in an environment where they weren't really taught boundaries and they weren't taught proper hygiene, and they really were kind of allowed to go in their pants maybe well beyond an appropriate age range. And so the mom wasn't strict enough per se. After that, we move into early childhood, which is the phallic stage of development. By phallic, we're talking about genitals. And Freud suggested children really discover their genitals, and they like to touch and pleasure themselves at this age. And this is, preschool age, let's say 3, 4, maybe carrying into 5. And he also suggested that during this stage, children become attracted, or they desire their opposite sex parents. So a little boy is, kind of obsessed with his mom, and he wants to marry her when he gets older. And so that's what Freud called the Oedipus complex. Since dad is really competing for his affection, he might grow bitter and angry toward dad and want to remove dad from the picture so he can have mom all to himself. And that's the Oedipus complex. The Electra complex is the opposite, where, girls are centered on their dad, mom's an interference, so they develop animosity toward mom, and they want to have that relationship with their dad. And that's might also be where we kind of get that, mommy's boy and daddy's little princess type thing, because we do see these relationship patterns emerge. Whether it's because of Freud's phallic stage, that's questionable. I'm not a huge Freudian fan, I should disclose that. So, I don't really subscribe to his theories, but I understand the catalyst for his theories. In middle childhood, Freud had it all wrong. He said that we go through a latent stage where nothing really happens, everything's kind of repressed. And I say he got it all wrong because we know biologically that's often a time in middle childhood and elementary school when our sexual desires and urges start to emerge, and we start to see, puberty, the first signs of puberty occur. And then finally in adolescence, again, it circles around the genital stage, largely because of the pubertal development, and now they're trying to establish healthy sexual desire and relationships. So that's Freud's theory in his various stages. I'm going to come back and wrap up some other theories, and then we'll wrap up the chapter. We'll see you in a bit.